Chapter 3. The brick building loomed above me as I clutched the cancer support group flyer in my hand. I paced beside the entrance, the click of my heels hesitant against the sidewalk as I debated opening the door to the Queen Anne Community Center. Anxiety twisted inside, leaving my mouth dry, limbs shaking. The last thing I wanted to do was sit in a room full of strangers, their eyes on me like whispers, intense and prying. But the idea of another day spent staring at my mortality amid the silence of my apartment filled me with a crushing dread, a dread I no longer had the strength to face alone. Warmth hit me as I entered, the air tinged with a faint smell that reminded me of school cafeterias, remnants of diluted bleach and lemon floor cleaner. Long buried memories flooded me with the visceral force only the power of scent could evoke. Lunch trays and the dissonance of chatter, the chill of the metal seat on my bare thighs, my hair obscured around my face, hiding the bruises, the sting of loneliness, for friends were dangerous. They asked too many questions. I shook off my thoughts, pushing them back into the locked compartments of my mind as my gaze fell to an open door, the soft buzz of voices filtering out into the hallway. Gathering my courage, I took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway. I cringed inwardly as heads turned in my direction, feeling like an interloper as I took in the faces before me. Some looked gaunt and fearful, others wore the lines of a deeply etched sorrow, but they all shared the same expression in their eyes, the look of resigned futility. Age held no sway in this room. Youth was only an afterthought. We had all been whittled down to the same fleeting timeline. Sorry I'm late. My voice came out clipped and loud, seeming to slam up against the abrupt silence within the room as I weaved between the circle of chairs and found an empty seat. Welcome to our group. An older woman with dark-rimmed glasses sat across from me with a clipboard in hand. Would you like to introduce yourself? I set my purse underneath my chair. My name is Julia Marino. The woman nodded and wrote something down on her clipboard. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julia. My name is Susan. Leaning forward, she rested her elbows on her knees, regarding me with her rehearsed, sympathetic eyes. Since you're a new face here, is there anything you'd like to share before we start with our group exercise? I looked around the room. The gentle sound of rain as it began to patter on the roof above us buffered the oppressive silence. No, thank you. Susan sat back, the gentle press of her gaze resting on me. That's okay. You can share with us whenever you feel ready. We all have our own process. Murmurs of agreement rose around me, followed by collective nods and smiles. I felt like something enclosed in glass and on display. Their empathy was stifling, and I fought back the urge to get up and leave. So, who would like to open up group today? Susan swept her hand across the room, and a frail older man cleared his throat, shuffling his feet as he leaned forward. I would like to share something. He dug his fingers into his thighs, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. My daughter moved in yesterday. She insisted she was staying to help me with chemo. I should be thankful. I should be grateful that she would do this for me, and I am. He trailed off, his gaze bouncing across the room as he gritted his teeth and pounded his fist against his leg. But I'm also angry. I'm angry because I can't take care of myself anymore, that my cancer has to affect her life. The force of his emotion hit me like a blast to my gut. Perhaps I was lucky. I didn't have to worry about my cancer becoming someone else's problem. Perhaps there was a veiled fortune behind my solitude. Nobody's life would change after I was gone. Thank you so much for sharing, Paul. A heavy silence fell across the room, heads bowing low as if lost in their own private prayers, until Susan spoke again. We are now going to divide ourselves into groups of 2. Please find a quiet corner, and I will pass out the answers we came up with in our last session. The room suddenly came alive with movement and chatter as the man sitting next to me turned and spoke close to my ear. Care to be my partner? I looked at him for the first time. Dark hair and warm chocolate eyes met mine. He wore a wide, easy smile that spoke of confidence, though his appearance did not convey that. His hair was in a state of erratic dishevelment, and the cheap fabric of his clothing lay loose and wrinkled over his tall, lean frame. I shrugged. Sure, why not? Great. He stood and grabbed his chair, motioning for me to join him. Let's snag that spot over by the window. I picked up my folding chair and reluctantly followed. So what exactly are we doing? Well, it's something called exercising our fears, he said as he settled himself by the window. The group wrote down all their fears last week, and we divided them into jars. Today, we're going to pick them at random, see if they apply to us, and then deconstruct them. And why are we doing that? I asked, smoothing the wrinkles on my shirt as I sat across from him. He cocked his head, a faint look of amusement drifting across his face. Well, I guess it's so we can better understand that we're not alone in our fears, and that maybe we share the same ones. I nodded, throwing him a thin smile as Susan breezed by, carrying a tray of mason jars with folded scraps of paper inside. Bending down, she set one on the floor between us. Thanks, Susan, he said before leaning toward me and extending his hand. I'm Quinn, by the way. His hand enfolded mine, its grip strong and warm against my skin. Julia, he smiled. Yes, I gathered that. Right. I absent-mindedly began to fiddle with my necklace, running the diamond charm back and forth over the chain as I angled my gaze out the window, watching the rivulets of water slowly trickle down the glass. Do you want me to go first, Julia? I nodded, but kept my eyes fixed on the window as he rooted through the pieces of paper in the jar. Being alone. There was a long pause before he continued. I guess that's a fear of mine. My shoulders tensed. Once again, my isolation stared down at me with judging eyes, demanding answers. Why are we taught to be so scared of being alone? I turned to him, attempting to brush aside the feelings that hissed inside me, the sorrow I had no name for. He ran his fingers through his hair with a sigh. Well, what's the point of life if you're not able to share it with someone else? I glanced around the room, taking in faces stretched against the mask of their own private stories. How many of them truly revealed their life to others? How many of them only lived side by side, like friendly neighbors that shared a wall but locked their doors at night? We're all alone in one way or another. Okay, there's some truth to that. Quinn settled back in his chair, looking out the window for a moment before turning his gaze to me. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. For me, I think the fear lies in a sense of emptiness. It's the relationships in our lives and the way we love others that define us in a lot of ways. Without those, who are we really? I raised my eyebrows at him, the familiar taste of my own regret resting on my tongue, bitter and impossible to wash away. I don't see why we need to seek others to define who we are. We don't have to, but it sure does help give us perspective, don't you think? He looked down at the piece of paper in his hand, his fingers folding back the edges. I mean, without the mirror of other people, we become disillusioned and cut off from the world around us. I bit my lip, the sting slicing through the heaviness of my thoughts. I had grown so accustomed to building windows that did not open. I'm not scared of being alone. I've been alone all my life. But are you lonely? Quinn's words challenged me, and his eyes met mine with an intensity I felt uncomfortable with. It was as if he were trying to reach inside and extract something private and delicate, and it pricked at my defenses. My turn. I reached for the jar and placed it on my lap, pulling out a piece of paper. Suffering. I set the jar down with a long sigh, this exercise feeling suddenly trite and meaningless. Who wasn't afraid of suffering? This is pointless. What's pointless? Quinn leaned forward and regarded me with a look of mild curiosity. All of this. I flung my arm out in the direction of the people huddled in pairs, talking softly. Everything. So you're angry? Of course I'm angry. I'm angry that I'm sick and there's nothing I can do to fix it. I was growing loud and a bloom of heat rose to my face as a few people turned in my direction. I swiveled my head back to the window, seeking solace in the steady thrum of rain, blanketing my vision in a wash of gray. I'm angry too. I looked at Quinn, his eyes meeting mine in a silent nod of solidarity, his gaze momentarily stilling the storm inside. My voice came out tattered, like a weary traveler seeking shelter in the remains of a battered house. Well, I guess we have something in common then. I waited until a stream of people filed out the door before I got up, my limbs cramped and aching from the uncomfortable middle seat. Susan stood by the window, adjusting the blinds. Thanks for coming, Julia. I hope to see you next week. We'll see. With a tight smile, I bent down and grabbed my purse, slinging it over my shoulder. I briskly walked out of the room, leaving the echo of my footsteps behind me. Pushing open the doors, I stepped into the chill of the afternoon. It had stopped raining, and the sky hung heavy and indifferent as a gust of wind startled the tree above me, scattering wet leaves across the pavement. It was nice talking with you, Julia. I whipped around and saw Quinn standing underneath an awning beside a motorcycle. Is that yours? I gestured toward the bike, the gleam of silver and chrome like a flash of brightness against the gray. It is? A slow, teasing smile stretched across his face. You feel like going for a ride? No, thanks, I quipped, pulling out my phone. I prefer an Uber. Ever ridden one of these? Quinn grinned as he slipped his helmet on and adjusted the straps. They're pretty fun. No, and I have no desire to. I looked over at him as he positioned himself under the motorcycle, his thighs straddling the seat, and that familiar itch began to crawl through me. But we could go back to your place. A flicker of surprise darted across his face as he stared at me. And what will we do at my place? I slid my phone back into my purse and walked up to him. Well, we could fuck. A nervous chuckle spilled out of him. Oh, you're funny. I wasn't joking. I met his stare head on, as if I could expose him, that feeling of power rising in my gut and taking hold. I wanted to reclaim myself, to wash away the thoughts that burned within me, to obliterate the clawing fear that battered against the cage of my chest. Quinn leaned forward and casually folded his arms across the handlebars. And what makes you think I don't have a wife and children waiting for me at home? I nodded at his hand with a flirtatious smirk. I don't see a ring. Plus, when has that ever stopped a man? Well, I don't know what kind of men you've been hanging out with. A faint smile played on his lips. But I could have a girlfriend, you know. Something tells me you don't. And what makes you think that? Because you were just flirting with me? I was? Quinn cocked his eyebrow, regarding me with a playful look. Yes, I know when a man is flirting with me. Besides, you wouldn't be inviting a woman to ride on your bike if you had a girlfriend. You're very observant. He shot me a crooked smile as his gaze slid over me. And as enticing as your offer is, I'm going to have to respectfully decline. I stepped back from him, unaccustomed to being rebuffed, the dynamic of power shifting, leaving me deflated. Well, that's your loss. You're not really my type anyway. And just out of curiosity, what is your type? Quinn's eyes began to twinkle with amusement. Still feeling stung, I gestured at him dismissively. Well, someone who knows how to dress, for one thing. With a laugh, he started up his motorcycle. The noise abruptly cut through his words, forcing him to shout above the rumble of the engine. I hope to see you next week, Julia. Heaving a long sigh, I wrapped my arms around myself, attempting to suppress all the emptiness shrieking inside like a hollow wind. I watched as Quinn threw me a wave and guided his bike across the sidewalk before accelerating down the street, leaving me standing there with a strange mixture of annoyance and intrigue.